Chapter 18. The Hatter and the Cook Testify. "Call the first witness," said the king. The rabbit blew 3 blasts on the trumpet and called out, "First witness!" The first witness was the Mad Hatter. He came in with a teacup in one hand and a piece of bread and butter in the other. "I beg your pardon, your majesty," he said, "for bringing these in, but I hadn't finished my tea when I was sent for." "You ought to have finished," said the king. "When did you begin?" The Hatter looked at the March Hare, who had followed him into the court, arm in arm with the Dormouse. 14th of March, I think it was," he said. 15th, said the March Hare. 16th, said the Dormouse. "Write that down," the king told the jury, and the jurors eagerly wrote all 3 dates on their slates. "Take off your hat," the king told the Hatter. "It isn't mine," the Hatter replied. "Stolen!" the king exclaimed, turning to the jurors, who immediately made note of the fact. "Oh, no, I keep them to sell," the Hatter explained. "I have none of my own. I'm a Hatter, you see." Here, the queen put on her spectacles and began staring at the Hatter, who turned pale and frigid. "Give your evidence," said the king, "and don't be nervous, or I'll have you executed on the spot." This did not encourage the witness at all. He kept shifting from one foot to the other, and looking uneasily at the queen. In his confusion, he bit a large piece out of his teacup instead of his bread and butter. At this moment, Alice felt an odd sensation, which puzzled her until she realized what it was. She was beginning to grow larger again. At first she thought she would get up and leave, but decided to stay as long as there was room for her. "I wish you wouldn't squeeze so," said the Dormouse, who was sitting next to her. "I can hardly breathe." "I can't help it," Alice said quietly. "I'm growing." "Well, you have no right to grow here," the Dormouse replied lazily. "Don't talk nonsense," said Alice. "You're growing too." "Yes, but I grow at a normal pace," said the Dormouse, "not in that ridiculous fashion." With that, it got up and crossed to the other side of the court. "Give your evidence," the king repeated angrily, "or I'll have you executed, whether you're nervous or not." "I'm a poor man, your majesty," the Mad Hatter began, his voice trembling. "I hadn't begun my tea, and with the bread and butter getting so thin, and the twinkling of the tea—" "The twinkling of the what?" asked the king, confused. "It began with the tea," the Hatter replied. "Of course twinkling begins with a T," the king snapped. "Do you take me for an idiot? Go on." "I'm a poor man," the Hatter went on, and most things twinkled after that. Only the March Hare said, "I did not," the March Hare interrupted. "You did," said the Hatter. "Did not," said the March Hare. "He's saying that he didn't," said the king to the jury. "Leave out that part." "Well, at any rate," the Hatter continued, "the Dormouse said—" and the Hatter trailed off for a moment. He looked anxiously around the room to see if the Dormouse would argue, too, but it was fast asleep. After that, the Hatter went on, "I cut some more bread and butter." "But what did the Dormouse say?" one juror asked. "I can't remember," said the Hatter. "You must remember," remarked the king. "I'll have you executed." The terrified Hatter dropped his teacup and bread and butter and got down on his knees. "I'm a poor man, your majesty," he began. "You're a very poor speaker," said the king. "But if that's all you know about it, you may step down." Relieved, the Hatter hurriedly left the court, leaving his teacup and bread and butter behind. "Take off his head outside," said the queen to one of the officers, but the Hatter was out of sight before the officers could reach the door. "Call the next witness," said the king. Alice guessed who the next witness was before she appeared by the way the people near the door began sneezing all at once. It was the Duchess's cook, carrying the pepper box in her hand. "Give your evidence," said the king. "I won't," said the cook. The king looked anxiously at the White Rabbit, who said in a low voice, "Your majesty must cross-examine this witness." "Well, if I must, I must," the king said, and after folding his arms and frowning at the cook until his eyes were nearly out of sight, he said in a deep voice, "What are tarts made of?" "Pepper mostly," answered the cook. "Molasses," said a sleepy voice behind her. "Grab that Dormouse," shrieked the queen. "Behead that Dormouse! Turn that Dormouse out of court! Pinch him! Off with his whiskers!" For some minutes the whole court was in confusion while the Dormouse was put out. By the time they had settled down again, the cook had disappeared. "Never mind, Call the next witness, said the king, sounding relieved. My dear, he muttered to the queen, why don't you cross-examine the next witness? It makes my head ache. Alice watched the White Rabbit fumble over the list and wondered what the next witness would be like. They don't have much evidence yet, she said to herself. Imagine her surprise when the White Rabbit read out, at the top of his shrill little voice, the name, Alice!